Good evening, everyone. Well, that's really, really loud. Thank you for gathering with us tonight. My name is Jeff Suzik, and I'm the director of Cranbrook Schools. I have the incredible honor of introducing this evening's distinguished alumni speaker, Henry Whiting II. But first, a little bit about the lecture series that brings Mr. Whiting to us tonight. In 1993, Chris Sirchio, Cranbrook School for Boys class of 1983, in collaboration with then Director of Schools Arliss Seibert, created the Sirchio Distinguished Speaker Series. Now in its 28th year, the Sirchio Lecture has created a legacy of enriching the intellectual lives of our students and community by presenting examples of Cranbrook Kingswood alums who have attained international preeminence in a chosen field. And that brings us to Henry Whiting II. Mr. Whiting has had what one might call a lifelong relationship with mid-20th century architecture and design, a life that I would say, and I'm a historian, so I'm right, can be divided into at least 4 distinctly important pieces or chapters. The first one begins in Midland, Henry's hometown, headquarters to not one but 2 Fortune 500 companies, Dow Chemical and Dow Corning, which were founded by Henry's great-grandfather. Midland is also known for the design legacy of Henry's great-uncle, Alden Dow, apprentice to Frank Lloyd Wright and renowned mid-century modern architect in his own right. Henry was literally immersed in his uncle's creations from the get-go, and a childhood spent at such a rich intersection of nature, beauty, design, and structure would have a lasting, lifelong impact on him. The third chapter of Henry's life, I think, encompasses the time he spent as an undergraduate at the University of Wisconsin, where he studied landscape architecture. Being so close to Frank Lloyd Wright's sprawling home, Taliesin, while at UW, Henry's appreciation for both Wright and his great-uncle Alden's artistic genius only grew. Following his studies, Henry moved west to Idaho to assist his parents in designing the retirement home that they were then building in Sun Valley. While there, he stumbled across the only structure of Wright's ever realized in that state, the Archibald Teater Studio. Henry ultimately purchased that studio, which he then began renovating and preserving almost immediately. Having now written 2 books about his exquisite home, Henry frequently lectures on what it is like to live in a mid-century modern masterpiece. Wouldn't it be great if we all could do that? And on the importance of preserving this uniquely American design movement. Now, if you've been paying attention, you will have noted that I inexplicably skipped over my chapter 2 of Henry's remarkable life. Did anyone notice that I went from 1 to 3? Yes? I admit it was intentional and done for dramatic effect. I've saved chapter 2 of Henry's remarkable life for last for a reason. It's that period of time between Midland and Wisconsin that he spent here at Cranbrook. As a member of the class of 1973, Henry was inspired by the brilliant and all-encompassing vision of another great architect, Eliel Saarinen. As Henry has said of his time on campus, and I quote, "When I first went there, Cranbrook looked so old-fashioned to me when compared to Alden's architecture, but gradually I came to appreciate the beauty and organic coherence of its design. The totality of Cranbrook's beauty would impact me and reinforce all of the ideas that were created by my Uncle Alden in Midland. The fact that it is architecturally perhaps the most famous high school in the country and one of the epicenters of mid-century modern design can only be attributed to fate or destiny for me." Henry Whiting, we are so glad that your inspirational life's journey intersected with the grand narrative of the Cranbrook educational community. It is our distinct honor to welcome you home tonight as this year's Sirchio Distinguished Speaker. So with no further ado, please join me in welcoming Henry Whiting II to the lectern.
Thank you all for coming. This is such an honor for me, and I'm reaching that point in life that I'm reflecting back on things and important things, and I have known for about the last year that I've been invited to give this talk, and it's given me a reason to focus on my whole life, not just Teeter's Knoll. I give frequent talks about Teeter's Knoll around, mostly in Idaho, but around the country, and this is the first time I've really been able to broaden out, and so I hope you enjoy the talk. And what I'm going to do here is to start with a film that we did. I worked for the last year with Idaho Public Television. They asked me if it would be okay to do a program about Teeter's Knoll, and so I'll start my presentation with that, and actually that frees me up to speak about other things, but it gives a wonderful introduction to my life with Frank Lloyd Wright, and I would welcome any questions when I'm done with my slides. So enjoy the film first.
High above the Snake River in the Magic Valley sits an architectural masterpiece, the only Frank Lloyd Wright designed building in Idaho, Teeter's Knoll. Its story reflects the confluence of 5 bold personalities: the country's premier architect, a famous Idaho artist and his wife, a mason with a wealth of talent and stone, and a preservationist with a love of design. Their aspirations combine to make Teeter's Knoll the unique gem it is today. Its existence is due to the great success of an Idaho original, Archie Boyd Teeter, a prolific artist who painted magnificent landscapes and captured some of the rich history of our state.
He's an extremely interesting and, in a simple way, a very complicated individual. And he was from an extremely poor family. He never finished 8th grade. His teacher kicked him out of class for doodling rather than doing mathematics. He wanted to paint, and I don't think he thought at that time that he needed any more education than that. He had no formal art instruction until winter 1921. He had classes at the Portland Art Museum. But he was painting prior to that time, self-taught, absolutely self-taught.
The subject of his paintings often drew upon the landscapes and the Western life he observed.
Archie had spent time in the late teens and 20s in the Hagerman Valley, and then he and his friend would fish for sturgeon in the Snake River and salmon, because salmon still came up into the Hagerman Valley. And then they would haul the fish up to the miners in Haley, and that's how they made a living.
As a result of his working along the Snake, he got a lot of material that he would paint about. I don't think he saw himself as a historian, but his art, there is a great deal of history, and especially history of the state of Idaho. He painted at least 24 mining scenes, just from memory, to record what it was like in those days. And he's also did a painting of what a logging camp looked like at that time. That's a marvelous record, and that should be taken advantage of.
In the summertime, his restless nature would carry him and his paints from Boise by mule to the heights of the Sawtooths, mountains that stirred his passion for majestic landscapes. Over the years, his nomadic adventures would deliver him to the town of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where breathtaking views of the Tetons would inspire a lifetime of work. It was here that he'd meet Patricia Wilson, who would become his wife and help Archie grow into an artist of international renown.
Patricia knew a lot about art. She was an artist herself.
Patricia was his sole gallery person, as she was all his life.
The view of Teeter is that he was a painter of the Grand Tetons. Well, yes, he certainly did that.
He could paint the Tetons from memory. And the story has it that somebody came into their little gallery in Jackson and said, "Oh, Mrs. Teeter, we just love Archie's work, but it's just, a little bit too expensive for us." And she said, "Well, come back in the morning. I'll have Archie paint you a smaller one tonight."
Oh, he was enormously prolific. He one time said that if he painted for a couple more years, that he would be over 10,000, he'd be the most prolific painter of all time. Now, whether that's right or that's wrong, he was enormously prolific. In the 20th century, there was no Western painter like him.
Archie was probably the most famous artist in Idaho.
Patricia's business acumen would capitalize on Archie's success and position them financially to commission a world-class studio from one of the 20th century's greatest architects, Frank Lloyd Wright. From Archie's years in the Hagerman Valley, he knew the ideal location for their studio, a place which came to be known as Teeter's Knoll.
The reason it's called Teeter's Knoll is because it literally is a knoll. Mrs. Farnsworth sold it to the Teeters for $125, and she thought she had just built these crazy artists out of a lot of money. But to her, it was useless land because you couldn't raise cattle on it. It's 2 acres in size, and there's a 150-foot cliff on the river side, and then the Snake River makes a big horseshoe bend in front of the site. It's just one of the most beautiful sites in Idaho, and Archie, with his artist sensibility, recognized that right away. And so they went to Wright with this site in mind.
By the time of the Teeter Commission, Frank Lloyd Wright was the most famous architect in the world. He pioneered the Prairie School movement and developed the concept of the Usonian home. His dwelling sought harmony with nature, and his plans for the Guggenheim Museum in New York would drive architecture toward a new frontier. A studio designed by Wright could signal to the world that an artist of great mastery occupied the space.
Clearly, the reason that they went to Wright was because it was a marketing thing for Archie. And virtually from mid-50s onward, every piece of promotional copy that she would do would always say that Frank Lloyd Wright designed his studio.
Wright's design and the natural resources of the rugged desert landscape would inspire one young mason from Oakley to produce a masterwork of his own.
Really, the great construction story of this place is the work of Kent Hale, which cannot have been easy because all the walls are angled at 60 and 120 degree angles, and it's a sloping site and the footing is stepped down and the walls are battered outwards below the windowsill level, so you have all this stuff enters into the calculation, and it's truly some of the finest rock work in any Frank Lloyd Wright house.
Well, I had been working through a fellow named Fred Reed, a contractor from Twin Falls. He called me one day and said, "I just got a plan here I'd like you to look at." I went down. When I saw it was a Frank Lloyd Wright house, well, I became very enthusiastic because at the time he was my ideal. I thought there was no one quite like him. He was right at his prime. No way I was going to miss this job, and so I did everything I could to get it.
He desired this job so much that he reduced his bid by about 1/3. He felt like if Frank Lloyd Wright could endorse the stone and promote his masonry, that would be his ticket to, big time.
He knew from his youth that they had this Oakley stone that was more beautiful than any rock he had seen. And at that point, he had even built this little fireplace for his parents outside their family home.
He was asked by his father to build this fireplace in honor of his grandfather. It's been in use for 75 years, and I still love it. I love to sit here and have a fire and It's pretty much exactly how it was when he completed it. And this is his first attempt at anything significant out of Oakley stones.
As with many of Frank Lloyd Wright's designs, the plans called for locally sourced material.
The original floor plan calls for the rockwork to look like Falling Water, the famous house over the waterfall in Pennsylvania. Falling Water is built of sandstone, and so that's what Wright was asking for, was a horizontally laid rock.
And so when I saw that in the specifications, I looked around here and found where it came out natural.
So back in the late 40s, early 50s, as he was having dreams of becoming a stonemason and getting into the stone industry, he came up here looking for the perfect stone. And he came across this area, and this is where all of the stone for Teeter's Knoll came from. And this is a great example of what he was looking for. It's been in the weather for probably tens of thousands of years, so the edges are softer, and it's got some lichen on it. And this one is another great example of maybe one that would be properly sized. This one hasn't been on the surface as long, but this is pretty much the shape that he was looking for.
Yeah.
And there was limited supply of it. And he picked up probably every bit of stone that had the characteristics that he was looking for to put it in Teeter's Knoll. It makes Teeter's Knoll that much more unique and special.
Yes.
Because that particular stone no longer exists.
Yeah.
Kent Hale's selection of Oakley stone would prove to be the spark to an industry that today infuses an estimated $250 million annually into the local economy.
This was the first major building that had ever been done in Oakley stone.
You can look at the prow and just see how straight it is. It's a 60-degree angle. I'm amazed that he was able to make it look so straight. It doesn't bow, it doesn't bend. He did everything perfectly. But if you look closely, it's also quite jagged.
Yeah, but as a whole, it reads as a straight line. Yeah.
Beautiful.
The surface rock Kent gathered for the studio is referred to as floatstone. Laying it in harmony with Wright's design would be just one of many challenges he faced.
You know, this was Kent's first project, really, which is quite amazing. But Patricia thought that it wasn't proceeding fast enough. And she fired Kent with the building about 2/3 finished.
She felt like he wasn't doing a very good job. She made some disparaging comments to a local newspaper.
They sent in the little article that said they were a little bit delayed on constructing the building because they had to teach a stonemason how to lay stone. This was his last straw as far as I was concerned.
Ultimately, he couldn't take it much longer. She sued him for leaving the job. He countersued for non-payment. He won the lawsuit, but ended up getting 1/10 of what he bid on the job, so $700 of the $7,000.
He didn't get to finish the project, and some of the work here is really, really bad. This is one of the most interesting parts of the whole studio because right here you see Kent Hale's original work below the level of the windowsill, and then above the windowsill is some other mason's work. This is all composed order, and this is chaos. There's no relation between the parts.
Yeah, this would have been one that he left on the mountain.
Okay.
It's hard for me to look at it, being someone who appreciates my father's work.
Yeah.
I think Mrs. Teeter might have robbed the world of something special if she'd allowed my father to complete the job.
Yes.
One of the signature features Kent Hale did complete before being released from the project was the chimney. This one built to a grand scale.
The rock work that would be looked at more than any other place in the whole studio would be this. And so here on the interior you see lichen, and I love to point this out to people that's 70 years ago that was put there, and that lichen is still alive and growing.
My father was an artist.
Yes, he was. He was.
Once construction was complete, the Teeters used the studio seasonally, splitting their time between Jackson Hole and Hagerman. In their later years, they gave generously to causes dear to them. They started the Archie B. Teeter Fund for handicapped children and supported important medical programs at the Mayo Clinic. Their nomadic spirit took them on adventures around the world. Archie collected images from exotic locations and brought them to life on his canvas back home. The studio would prove to be a sanctuary for the rest of their creative lives.
I have heard from friends of the Teeters that his most creative work was done here at the studio.
Archie Boyd Teeter died in 1978, but his spirit is alive and well in Hagerman, where the Historical Society purchased a new home that will display some of the 600 Teeter paintings they have in their collection.
We are so excited about this new building. This is going to be the Teeter room, and in it we have Archie's easel, and we put here one of my favorite of Archie's paintings. It is of the Tetons, and it was part of the collection that we got from the Idaho Community Foundation. So we're quite pleased to have that in our room.
Patricia moved to California after Archie's death and passed away in 1981. The studio was abandoned and left to the Quaker Church. Its condition deteriorated until it was in a state of ruin.
You know, it looked kind of like a prison camp. There was a chain link fence with 3 strands of barbed wire. It really looked pretty bad. In any case, I was really intrigued. I started to conceive in my mind, this would really be a great way to learn hands-on about Frank Lloyd Wright, would be to buy this place and to restore it.
It was his uncle, Alden B. Dow, a student of Wright's, who gave Henry the confidence to take on the project.
So it's always been really important to me that the first person I asked about this was my uncle. He said, Henry, I think that's really a good idea that you do that for your life. And he says, as a matter of fact, I think that is such a good idea that if I were your father, I would loan you the money to make sure that you did it. And then he paused for a second. He said, but then it wouldn't mean as much. And he was telling me that I had to take responsibility for it. And that's been like one of the most important things ever said to me in my life. It's just one of these things that was just meant to happen.
After he purchased the property in 1982, his first order of business was to restore relations with Kent Hale.
Henry had a good enough eye to see that the original stonework was perfect, it was beautiful. And so he reached out to my father. There was still some hard feelings about the whole Teeter's Knoll. And Henry basically provided redemption for that mess that he went through in the 50s. I think he was really proud of it. I think he recognized that it was pretty much his showcase. It was the most significant job that he'd ever done.
Henry's preservation of the studio has ensured that Frank Lloyd Wright's legacy lives on in the Hagerman Valley, where upon occasion he opens his private home to tours organized by local nonprofits, giving tourists an opportunity to see firsthand the mastery of Mason Kent Hale and experience the breadth of Wright's creative space that is Teeter's Knoll.
Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate you being here. You can't tell from here, but you're about to experience one of the most beautiful sights in the whole state.
It's just fascinating, and I can see why people are getting emotional as soon as they come around the corner.
It's all situated so that every window you look out, you have this amazing view of the river. It's just gorgeous.
I love how it definitely feels like an artist lives in the studio.
Right.
I think it is incredible. I love everything here, the rock, the view. I mean, I'm so happy I finally was able to come on a tour here.
To be able to showcase the architecture and the history
of a private home, and then to have someone like Henry, who is an amazing steward of this home, it's a big deal for preservation.
Frank Lloyd Wright homeowners always talk about how they see something new every day in their house, and I would say that 90% of the time it's the relationship of the architecture to nature. At this point in my life, I spend a lot of times observing that. I have the time to watch the sun gradually come into the main studio room, and then the leaves are dancing on the floor, and then as the sun goes down, the light goes deeper and deeper into the main room. You get this amazing feeling of harmony. It doesn't require a manifesto to explain what's going on or anything. It's just visceral. You can just feel it. It really is like a chapel. It is a chapel to creativity, a creativity for an artist. Well, that's what we spent the last year working on, and I was very pleased with the way that came out. But I would really like to focus more on the rest of my life in this talk, and I will start with it seems particularly appropriate for me to include Balthazar Korab's iconic photograph of the Aldendow home and studio. Balthazar being known, as I understand, is known as Cranbrook's photographer. And this image, well, let me say this, Balthazar also photographed our Aldendow house, and he came and photographed my parents' house in Sun Valley as well, so we would really consider him to be a personal friend. And it would be my opinion that Balthazar, of the well-known architectural photographers in the United States, is one of the underappreciated photographers of Frank Lloyd Wright's work. He has a wonderful image, especially his favorite Wright image for me is actually of the Smith House. And when you look at his work, it's just beautiful and subtle and really, really well done. So this view of the Aldendow home and studio, it was about a half a mile from our house from our Aldendow house where I grew up. And when I was old enough, probably about 3 years old, I followed my older sisters and we walked through the old Dow orchard and into the Dow gardens, and I saw this view for the first time, probably as a 3-year-old. And I have been enraptured by architecture ever since. This is, to me, was the most beautiful building I've ever seen. And that's obviously a subjective thing, but it is a reasonable statement. But that is his conference room where you would sit when he reviewed his plans. And I wondered, even as a young boy, how could any client refuse an architect's design in such a beautiful setting? I first went into that space probably when I was 7 with my mother when she was working with Alden on the design of something for our house. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I've been in that house dozens or even hundreds of times. And this is kind of a fun shot. People like to get up on the chimney and take a shot like that. And that is me and my late wife in about 1996 or so, and climbing up on that thing. It exemplifies the fun that Uncle Alden had in his personality. And this is a picture of what it looks like inside the conference room on the way down. It's just a wonderful space. This was taken during a family event, and they don't allow interior photography, but I got permission to show this, and it's a studio is open to the public, and it's really worth touring. For some reason, I don't really have very good photographs of our own home, but this is the Whiting residence that Alden designed in 1947, and that is the front door, the view of the front door. He started designing it in 1947 when my parents had one child, and by the time he was done, they had 6 children, and the Whiting file is the largest. The Whiting file of residential drawings is the largest file of residential drawings in the Alden Dow archives, which is kind of funny. This would be sort of a period picture of the master bedroom, and you see the classic mid-century modern furniture, and the deck overhead, which is similar to a Wright house as well, and the swimming pool was right outside there. This is a hallway down. My bedroom would be the first bedroom on the left-hand side there. I like looking at this because I note that there are you see the hinges on the door are sauce hinges. And I saw these at Cranbrook. I can't remember, or Cranbrook or Kingswood, maybe it was at Kingswood today, that they use these same hinges, and they're blind hinges, and so that you don't see the big thing on the side of the door, and you see the Arnie Jacobson egg chairs. And in the early 1960s, my father became the president of Dow Chemical International, the international division of Dow, and Mom decided that she was going to travel with him, and so oftentimes they'd be gone both of them would be gone for 2 months or so, traveling around the world on business. And she knew that she was going to do this, so she asked her uncle, what should I collect when I go on these trips with my husband? And he said, why don't you get a piece of wood from every country that you visit, and we'll build you a door. And the man on the left side there is Ted Guizdella, who was the in-house woodworker for Alden, and he was one of the most gifted Finnish carpenters I've ever seen. And the other man was Bud Winters, the man who did the finish work. And you can see the playfulness of the door. This is it in situ at the front door in place, and in that photograph on the right-hand side of the shot, you can see what I think it was his abstraction of a log cabin, of a cross-section of logs, and the dark diamond in the middle is ebony, and the main diamond is oak. And I think the other was walnut, so it's a beautiful composition. Growing up in Midland, there are 60 Alden Dow houses, and this is one of his early unit block houses made out of the same material that the home and studio was. And this would have been designed in 1934. before Wright did any of his Usonian houses. And this is actually quite a departure. Alden studied with Frank Lloyd Wright in the summer of 1933 and stayed there for 6 months and then left to go back to Midland because he actually had more work in Midland than Wright had in Spring Green. This is the fireplace, and that the unit block houses were some of the most playful and interesting houses. I always said that if I ever moved back to Midland, I would want to live in this house. This is the junior high school that I went to that Alden designed. It was brand new when I was there, and I just hated this school. I don't know that you can. This was the period when they were building schools, when they wanted them to have no windows. So people like me couldn't daydream looking out the window. And you would get there in the morning, and in the afternoon when you went outside, you had no idea what the weather was like. And I just found that horrifying. So the way to solve it was to come to Cranbrook. and I came to Cranbrook in 1970 and graduated in 73. And of course you know what this is. And the dining hall as well. I was like to say that I was not an undistinguished person at Cranbrook, but I wasn't one of the standout academic people, because I knew from the time that I arrived that I wanted to be a golf course architect. And it's partly out of the influence of my uncle, but I also realized, having looked at his home and studio, how could I ever create anything as beautiful as that? And golf was the one game for which you could design the playing surface. And so my whole time here was spent working on, or was imagining being a golf course architect, not being a banker or even an architect or whatever. But so I went to school to college as a landscape architect. But here's a picture that we took last year of the football stadium, and I don't know that this ever been documented, but that simply has to be the most beautiful high school football field in the United States. I can't imagine there's one better. And it certainly has the best architectural pedigree, being the Ilil Saarinen's only football field. And part of being here in 1970 was that the Detroit Lions were still practicing at Cranbrook. And it was I was here for the last 2 years of that. Usually they practiced down on the lower field, so we didn't see them that much. But one day I stood outside the locker room and got autographs from all my heroes, like Alex Karras and Joe Schmidt and Lem Barney and Greg Landry. And I was actually there the day after Greg Landry had taken the ball from their own 2-yard line and run as a quarterback sneak all the way into for a touchdown, 98 yards. And I don't think anybody has ever exceeded that. And he's signing his autograph, and little old me says, "Nice sneak." And he kind of stopped and looked at me and said thank you and went on. But these little memories you have forever. But the day that the one day the Lions practiced on the field was one of the most exciting days I had at Cranbrook. And we sat on the far side on the wall there. And what was really interesting was not so much the players, but all the hangers on that were there, the press, the agents or whatever, and there were not lots of people watching, but enough, and it was a beautiful fall day like that, and it's certainly one of my most indelible Cranbrook memories. And of course, with my interest in Alden Dow and Frank Lloyd Wright, my favorite building on the Cranbrook campus is Kingswood. And whenever I come back to Cranbrook, which has been many times since I've lived in Idaho, I always stop and visit Kingswood. And if I don't get chills up the back of my spine from being there, I get tears in my eyes. I just think it's one of the most incredibly beautiful, well-constructed buildings that I have ever witnessed. And I think I have the quote right, but Frank Lloyd Wright complained to Eliel Saarinen that he wished that he got to use the wonderful materials that Saarinen got to use. Wright thought he always had to use cheap materials, and Saarinen's work was so beautiful. And I just think this is an extraordinary room when you think that it was the father that designed the building, his wife that did the tapestry, and his son that did the furniture. It's just extraordinary. Both dining halls, the dining hall at Cranbrook is unforgettable as well. In doing this, preparing for this presentation, the comment was made that there's not just one Henry Whiting, there are 3 Henry Whitings. And it's kind of funny because my uncle Henry was a student at Cranbrook, and his son Henry III was here. But there are actually 4 Henry Whitings, and that man on the left there is responsible for that. That's Henry Whiting Sr. And this is my graduation at the Christ Church Cranbrook. And I really came to Cranbrook as much as anything because of my grandfather. I loved my grandfather, and he lived on Lake Park Drive right on Quarton Lake, and we always had Thanksgiving there. And so that's part of how I ended up at Cranbrook. After leaving Cranbrook and still knowing that I wanted to be a golf course architect, I had looked at a number of schools to study landscape architecture. There were no golf course curriculum at that point, and I had pretty much narrowed it down to University of Wisconsin, Michigan State, and University of Utah to go to. And I really had an intention to go to Michigan State because I had classmates who were going there. I didn't have any classmates going to the University of Wisconsin, but we looked at the Madison campus in the morning and then went to East Lansing. And I will probably upset somebody here, but I just found the Michigan State campus kind of scary, and that the Madison campus was just beautiful, gloriously beautiful. So another decision solely based on beauty in my life, there are many of those decisions that I made, but going to Madison to school was based on that, and I had no idea about Frank Lloyd Wright at that point, and that he actually lived 30 miles west of there when he was alive. So this is the largest lecture hall on the UW campus. In my second semester in Madison, it was announced that Professor John Kienitz was going to be lecturing, giving a seminar on Frank Lloyd Wright that met every Thursday night from 6:30 at night to 9:30 at night, which, if you remember your college days, is one of the worst times for a class, because no one was attending class on a Thursday night, at least not in Madison. And Kienitz's class started in a small little classroom, and there were about 30 or so people there. And he went through, I can't even remember exactly how he started it, but he ended the conversation by saying the only architect ever to outdo Frank Lloyd Wright in terms of concrete architecture was Alden B. Dow. And how all of the things could happen that I would be present to hear that is just like the fate, I don't know what you call that, fate or whatever, but I went up to Professor Keenitz and introduced myself and told him that I was Alden Dow's great nephew, and we had a nice conversation, and that class changed my life, totally changed my life. And it was the only class I ever took in college where I never once skipped it. And he gave a lecture on falling water that interestingly enough, in 1970 or 71, I had never seen a color picture of falling water, and I always thought the parapets were white. And his lecture showed them in all different seasons, and they're actually a brown ochre. I don't know how you describe it, but it's definitely a brownish sort of a color, and it was a revelation to me how beautiful it was and how different it looked in the spring and in the fall, depending on the color of the foliage. That it reflected the foliage back. Those things are not as well appreciated about falling water as the drama of the cantilevers and the structural audacity of it. But the lecture for me that was unforgettable. And it was midway through the semester, and Professor Keenitz, who was, in his 80s and quite eccentric, walked into this large classroom, which was totally, there wasn't a seat available anytime, even in the balcony. It was totally full the whole time. He walked in, didn't look at anybody, walked down the aisle, and where the man is standing on the stage there was a podium, and he set his books down on the podium and walked to the chalkboard behind, and in great big letters about 3 feet tall did FLLW. And when he turned around, his hands were shaking, and he had tears coming out of his eyes because he was so moved by the signature. And then he proceeded to go on for an hour and a half about how the upswinging end of the W was emblematic of the way Frank Lloyd Wright approached life and all of the tragedies he had with his beloved Mae McChaney dying in the fire and the multiple fires at Taliesin, but he always came back and recovered. And I'll never forget the feeling of seeing him, an 80-year-old man, that deeply moved by doing that. And I vowed, if I can ever express that much passion in my life, I will feel that my life has been successful. And it was obviously it was the most important class that I took in my whole education. And from that point on, I was supposed to be studying landscape architecture, but I would go into the art history library, and I would pull up the art, I forgot what it was, the index for art and architecture journals of, say, 1938, and I would look up Frank Lloyd Wright, and I'd write down all the articles that were interesting, and I'd go back into the stacks and probably spend 3, 4, or 5 hours studying that. And essentially, I taught myself about Frank Lloyd Wright after learning from Keenitz. And landscape architecture is known as LA, LA obviously, but my roommates in college called my study habits leisurely arts. And I did end up flunking out of school. I actually moved to Idaho and restored Teeter's Knoll for the first time before graduating from college. And finally, because I was to graduate in December, and my parents were there, and the commencement was before finals. But I already knew that I was going to flunk out because I had done the midterm was so bad. And so I finally, I had so many bad dreams about that over so many years. It was 7 years. I went to the Yellowstone Institute, which was sort of an environmental studies school, and got my 2 credits, and had the credits for went to the University of Wyoming, and they transferred to Madison, and I got my degree. And then I went and I told my parents that what had happened. And my mother said, you know, that's just the way your grandfather would have done it. He would have taken care of things, and then he would have told everybody about it. And so what had been a 7-year nightmare turned out to be a really beautiful experience. So Dad retired from Dow Chemical in, I think it was about 1975, and Midland is, you know, a small town of about 25,000 people there, and if you're not working for Dow Chemical, what are you doing, basically, especially when he in a position like he was in. So they decided that they wanted to go rent a house in Sun Valley. We had been skiing in Sun Valley since my dad loved to ski, and growing up in Birmingham, used to ski at Otsego Ski Club, and I think there are a lot of Cranbrook people that skied there. But he had gone to Sun Valley in about 1940 with his Aunt Katie from Grosse Pointe, and had basically had just a wonderful time. And so when our children all got to be old enough to consider skiing there, I started skiing when I was probably 3 or 4 years old at Otsego in the late 50s. And then by 1968, we were actually pretty bored with skiing in Michigan, and went to Sun Valley, and our whole family just absolutely fell in love with it, including my mother, who didn't ski at all, because after the Michigan winters we would go out to Idaho and the sun would be out and it would be just gorgeous and beautiful. And so my whole time at Cranbrook, I had a Sun Valley poster on the wall of my dorm room, and I think that's what got me through Michigan winters, was knowing that we were going to go to Sun Valley. So I was still in Madison studying, and they called me up and asked me if I would go out with them to Sun Valley to help on a weekend, to help find them a place to buy. Not to buy, but to rent. And so the 3 of us flew out, and we got there, and on Saturday morning we were looking all around. We found a realtor, and we looked. There were no long-term rentals like that. So they made a decision that, well, let's look for a house that we could perhaps buy. And we looked around and found an acceptable place, which they did end up buying. But they also saw the lot that you're looking at there, which doesn't look probably very prepossessing, but and they bought that lot. They put in an offer on that lot on Saturday afternoon, and on Sunday morning we went around the community looking at all the houses with the realtor, and asked about who, because they were going to look for a local architect to design it, and not me, but they pointed out the houses that they liked, and they were all designed by the same man. So in that afternoon, we called up Neil Wright, was his name, and you'll see his picture in a minute. We went there and met him, and this just blows me away in this era when people design a house now. Some architects will ask them to fill out a 25-page questionnaire to help the architect design. And Mom and Dad were able, on the spur of the moment, to give all of the requirements to Neil that produced the house that he eventually designed. They had had so much experience working with Alden Dow that it was kind of second nature with them. And so I would actually go back out with them a couple of times after Neil had completed the plans. This was the site, and this is a very early shot. It was at the last minute, Neil asked Mom and Dad, "What is the one question that you would like to ask me that you haven't asked me?" And they thought about it for a second, and my dad said, "Do you know Snowbird? We really like the architecture at Snowbird." And if anyone's been to Snowbird, it's a concrete built, it's a whole, the tramway and everything is all made from concrete. So at the very last minute, the whole program of the house changed from being kind of a typical Sun Valley house to being a very, very modern house. And Neil just loved working on the house, and this is my mother. I just love this picture. I've always loved this picture. This is a woman who loves architecture. She's very, very happy to be sitting in the middle of construction. That's the retaining wall for the driveway. The concrete is about to be poured. The whole house is a poured-in-place concrete building. And this is a little bit later picture of Mom. That's how she'd spend her Sunday afternoons when they were in their other house. And that's their dog, Boom Boom, who was a St. Bernard who weighed more than twice as much as she did. He weighed 250 pounds. And so this is the start of the living room roof. And it is going, those coffers, those equilateral triangle coffers, which when I got studying Frank Lloyd Wright, I was fascinated by his hexagonal or equilateral triangle houses. As a landscape architect, there's a certain kind of freedom of space that happens. So when I first saw Neil's drawing of a house that was obviously on these angles, I just could not believe it, because I was so excited to see that. But that is a very early shot of before. You can see the parapet walls on the top part of the picture, but the concrete will be poured over those fiberglass coffers, and then those coffers will be reused on other parts of the building. But it's sort of like a parking garage idea, but it's in triangles. And it's actually incredibly complex, because each of the coffers well, first of all, that'll be filled with rebar reinforcing rods, but it will also be filled. Each one of the coffers will have a light fixture there. So it probably took at least 6 months to form this work, to form this part, and then to pour it. And this is Neil Wright, the architect who essentially became my best friend. He had asked me while I was still in Madison if I would come help him for the summer in the early stages as a landscape architect, and help him to lay out the driveway, because it was a sloping site and we wanted the house to sit as low as possible on the site. But it's also in a winter community, so you're limited by the slope of the driveway, and it can't be too steep because you have to do it in snow. And so I was able to do those calculations and to determine where the actual footings would go. And at the end of the summer, I just loved being in Idaho so much, and we'd hiked and we'd gone into the mountains, and all of this I would have to relate back again to Cranbrook, because we were the first class. The class of 73 in 1970 were the first class to do the wilderness program. And we had gone to North Carolina, to the North Carolina Outward Bound School. And I blossomed there. It was a wonderful thing. My parents were not people who camped or anything like that, and I loved being in the mountains of North Carolina. So when I got out to Idaho, it was totally unexpected and wonderful that I fell in love with the mountains. And at the end of that summer, I had to go back for one more semester, and that because Neil finally agreed to let me come work for him full time. At first he said, "No, Henry, I don't have any I don't have enough landscape architecture work for you to do." And I said, "No, Neil, I don't want to do landscape architecture. I want to learn how to do working drawings." So I worked for him for 5 years during the construction of this, and he taught me how to do architectural working drawings. This is back when you use pencil and the old-fashioned way, and when you're working with angles like 30, 60 angles, it's much more complicated to create the drawings than a rectangular house, and I got to be pretty good at it. But really, the real reason I flunked out of college was I could not wait to get back to Sun Valley. I was just dreamed of being there, and I was completely not focused on my classwork. This is what the house. This was soon after it was finished, and this is what the house looked like on the sagebrush hillside, with the aspen trees planted on the south and spruce trees on the north, somewhat like it happens in nature. And the living room is on the left-hand side, and the bedrooms and the main part of the house sort of in the middle, and the driveway is on the right-hand side of the drawing. This is the living room, and in the background is the ski mountain at Sun Valley. This had the best view lot in the whole place, and you can see the result of the coffers, the ceiling, the equilateral triangles. I guess you can't really see the light fixtures there, but they're up in there. And then they had that custom-made carpet made, which reflected the ceiling. And it's everything is, of course, poured in place concrete and then sandblasted to create a much softer sort of appearance. And this is the stairway coming down the two-story space. You entered on the upper level, and then you came down these stairs. And I don't know if anybody can recognize that sculpture on the triangle at the bottom, but that's a Marshall Frederick's The Lion and the Mouse. And my mom and dad had that from the time that I was a boy. So another Cranbrook sculptor. And so this was the last time that I saw my uncle, and he flew out to see the house, and his comment actually was nobody ever asked me to design a house like this, and I think he loved the house, although he died within a year of this picture being taken. Neil's wife, Katie, took these pictures, and I just treasure them because that was the last time I saw my uncle. And that's my mother. In the later days of her life, probably after having lived there for 20 or 30 years, they lived there from 1980 until about 2005 or so. So it was during the summer that I was working for Neil that I first came out and saw Teeter's Knoll. And as the film mentioned, it was surrounded by the chain link fence with 3 strands of barbed wire. And I came out early in the summer that I worked for him. And actually, when anybody else would have gone hiking in the Sawtooths or whatever, I came down to see the only Frank Lloyd Wright building in the state. And this is the condition it was in at that point. And as the film said, I began to envision a restoration project. So this is a fairly early picture of Teeter's Knoll from, I'm guessing, 1959 or 1960. And that's what it looked like when it was finished, before any landscape grew in. And I have to tell you about my county of Gooding County, Idaho, where this is located, has a population of about 15,000 people, and we have 2 stoplights in the whole county. And the town of Bliss, where I live in, has a population of 250. I think in some of the years I've been there, it swelled up to 350, but it's been around 250 the whole time I've been there. The other town nearby has 800 people, the town of Hagerman. And if you go from Teeter's Knoll southwest, say towards San Francisco, which would be like right over that cliff on the left-hand side of the picture, you can go for 300 miles and pass over only 2 paved roads. That would be like going from here to Mackinac Bridge, and there'd be only 2 paved roads. That's how different the Idaho is. And we're on the border of what's been called the empty quarter of the United States, the least populated. Southwest Idaho, northern Nevada, eastern Oregon, and sort of northwest California. So it's quite a remote situation. That road was actually at that point was the main east-west road in southern Idaho, and it's still there in about the same conformation, but a bypass has been added, and there's actually a freeway that's only a couple miles away, so it's a little bit deceptive, but nevertheless, it may be the most remote of all Frank Lloyd Wright's work. And this was a picture taken soon after I bought it, and you can see the scaffolding behind. And that's my contractor, Jack McNamara, with the lush mustache, and my father in the middle, and that's me, of course, on the right. And my parents just loved following all of my progress at Teeter's Knoll. They never interfered, but they followed closely because both of them just loved architecture. And I did not aspire to learn to be a carpenter, but I did want to participate in the process of restoring the house. So this is me on one of the top windowsills, laying on my back, sanding the top above me. And there were 105 pieces of glass in the house. They were all single pane glass, and they had to be replaced because of the water staining on the inside. They had to be replaced with thermopane. And so we had to go through and sand down all 4 sides of all the wood, and it was an incredibly tedious process, and then replace it with the thermopane. It took about 6 months to do this. And this is what my living room looked like in that summer of '82. And I was trying to live there at the time. And Teeter's Knoll it's an artist studio. It's not really even a house. So it doesn't actually have a formal bedroom. The bedroom is a partition off the main space, and it's open to the upper ceiling. And I like to tell my Frank Lloyd Wright friends that I have the only Frank Lloyd Wright house without a bedroom. And during this time, you can't really tell, but there are sheets of visqueen that are hanging over the windows to protect it from the wind. The wind in southern Idaho can blow pretty badly, and I had basically a tent set up over the bedroom and where I would sleep, which was fine in August and September and October, but when December came along, it got pretty cold. And the one room that we hadn't dealt with yet was the bathroom, which was a classic Frank Lloyd Wright bathroom that was 6 feet by 8 feet. It was one of those Wright. He's notorious for his bathrooms, and one of those ones that you sit on the toilet and open the door and it bangs your knees. But it actually had, at that point, still had its ceiling, and it was enclosed, and it had a wall heater. So it's one thing to sleep in a sleeping bag, but what do you do from the time everybody leaves until 10 o'clock at night when you actually want to go to sleep? And so I would lay in the bathtub with no water in it, and with a flashlight I would read, and then get in the bed at that point. And I managed this for a while, but at some point I had to finally give in, and I got a hotel room and went on. But every construction project has these horror stories, so I was trying not to bore you too much with these kind of things, but that's what that same view looked like after we finished. And these were pictures taken for my second book, At Nature's Edge, by Scott Zimmerman, and it's looking towards the prow. And those origami chairs were designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, and we built those. They were not in the house, and the ottoman was there. It's a hexagonal ottoman. You can see the grid inscribed on the floor, which is typical. The Smith house has the same thing, except this is a parallelogram grid, and it's 5 feet on a side, which is an unusual grid for Wright. Usually they're 4 feet. The altitude of it is 4 feet. So it's smaller. So it makes all of the space bigger. The proportion of the whole place is bigger, but it is essentially a one-room structure, so it doesn't really matter that much. And you see the slope of the windows. What the other architectural feature is the window sills relate to the roof, not to horizontal, and it creates this absolutely magical place, which could easily be a chapel. And we have essentially kind of had services like that, but there are more diagonals in this interior than any other Wright interior that I've ever seen, and I think that's appropriate because it's an artist studio, and it's a place meant for creativity, not for repose. The Smith house was meant for repose, for people to be comfortable in. That's not the purpose of this building, and that's why it's so different. And here's looking back the other way, another Scott Zimmerman photograph. And if you see the structural beams, the 4x12s actually are directly above the grid lines. It's a very the whole design is guided by the grid or whatever, and I always think of the grid as like a staff in music, and if it's a square grid, it's say the key of C, and if it's a diagonal grid like this, I don't know what one of the more remote keys would be, but it's a whole different situation. But the net result is a feeling of great harmony of the space. And this is one of the great things that happens with me is the people that I meet and work with during the process. And this is my friend Paul Bates, who was the craftsman who built a lot of the furniture. He originally came to work on installing the kitchen cabinets, and he's never left. He still comes, and this. I'm gonna skip ahead a page. This is these are Alden Dow lanterns that Alden had designed for House Beautiful magazine in 1962. There were 6 different designs, and you could write into the magazine, and home craftsmen could build these. And these are called the pedal lanterns, and they were all over Midland when I was growing up, and I wanted very much to bring my heritage back into Teeter's Knoll, and so I had these pedal lanterns made. I just love having them. But, whoops, no, where am I? Excuse me. This is the pedal lanterns were basically square in shape, and I got really interested in how do you take a hexagonal building and blend it with a square. You have to deal with washing machines, beds, and things like that. But it's always an awkward thing to make a square and an equilateral triangle or a hexagon, however you look at it. How do you make them blend? Well, what you do is you turn a cube up on its end, and it will. It has 6 corners that will project down, and with no distortion, you can have a. Each of those. This is my design that Paul has built, and you have these pedals that are square. But the base of it is a hexagon, and I had done this design back in 1985 or so. And Paul's a pack rat, and one day we were having lunch a few years ago, and he brought this drawing to lunch with him, and I had completely forgotten about it. Very difficult to design that and figure out the angles and whatever. And so I said, Paul, why don't you build that? And he looked into it, and it would have taken 8 different jigs to do each of those pedals. You multiply that times 51, it would have taken him forever. So he had a friend who was a computer whiz, and he figured out all the angles, and he was able to cut all those pieces of oak with the machine. And in any case, we built these wonderful lanterns. Paul is the person who everyone in the Sun Valley area goes to when there's a project that nobody else can figure out. And it's just one of the great things about working on a project like this is the people you meet and the friends that you make. And it's been 42 years now, and we're still friends. We have lunch once or twice a month together, and it's a very one of the really great things about working on projects like this. This is this is my favorite one of the Aldendow lanterns. It's called the Copper Roof Lantern, and it just looks so perfect at Teeter's Knoll. Aldendow's lanterns and Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture just fit perfectly together. And down behind it is the bunkhouse that I actually designed. That there had been a building on that site, and it was in such bad condition that we had to tear it down. It was where the original Tom Casey, the original Frank Lloyd Wright apprentice, had lived. And I would have loved to have saved it, but I designed this, and I realized when I got to the Smith house this morning that that was the prototype. This is a board and batten siding, and you see the fascia detail is similar, probably not as graceful as Frank Lloyd Wright's, but it's a beautiful building that I was going to live in while the construction was going on, but it ended up taking too long to build, and it wasn't done until we were finished the main house. And but it's the guest house right now, and you can see it's looking down on the rapid of the Snake River, and this is the view. It's truly one of the most beautiful views. I designed that bench basically to be the handrail so you didn't fall off the edge. And when the building inspector came to inspect the building after my second restoration, I was afraid. I knew he was coming, and I was afraid at the moment that he would see this because it's so obviously not to code. But one of the great things about living in rural Idaho in Gooding County is that he stopped and he looked at it and he says, "You catch any big uns down there?" I'd love to tell that to people in LA or someplace where the building inspectors are really, but it allows you to just completely see through you can see the rapid through the posts or whatever you want to call them. And so my next project was I wanted to build a house in the Sun Valley area to be as a spec house to do what Frank Lloyd Wright did with his prairie houses, which the prairie houses are inspired by the flat landscape, and so they have these wonderful long roofs that come out. And I thought, well, we have a much more beautiful landscape in Idaho. Bunsey told me I shouldn't say that to you because I might upset somebody because they'll think, God, that's the ugliest thing they've ever seen. But I love these hillsides. These sagebrush hillsides are just so beautiful, and the way the sun sets around them and creates these gentle shadows. It's a very feminine sort of a landscape. And everybody in the mountains, of course, always build log cabins or sort of Western stuff. And I thought, let's do something different, and maybe it will inspire the other architects in the area to do something that reflects the landscape. And so I had met in my travels as an architect in Albuquerque named Bart Prince, and together we worked on this design. And this is how we call this the Colonia house, which is Colonia is the Latin name for the genus of sea turtles. And each of these roofs are kind of curved. From the inside, it looks like a shell, and the beautiful way the shadows wrap around as the sun goes around during the day. There's a 75-foot skylight in the middle. The living room, the main room is in the middle with the living room, the kitchen, and the dining room, and a fireplace. The two guest bedrooms are at this end, and the master bedroom is at the upper end. This is what it looks like a little bit closer, and I think Bart was a student of Bruce Gough's, and Gough was sort of the renegade architect. He was a friend of Frank Lloyd Wright's, but his architecture is quite out there, as is Bart's, and so we just had a great time working together. Bart knows more about Frank Lloyd Wright than anybody I've ever met. He just loves Wright's work, but he has his own vocabulary that he works with, and this I think he agrees that this is one of his best houses. This is the interior of the main room, and the fireplace is kind of in the middle down there, and it shows the sort of shell of the roof, and then the smaller fins on the right hand side of the image are the skylight. And so this is a picture of me when it was finished, and this is the ramp leading up to the front door. Just like Wright, we like to make things not a straight path to the entry door, but to make it obvious what the direction was, but you don't know how you are going to get there, and it just engages everybody in a more direct way. All of the detailing is circular here, including the tops of the railing there to emphasize, to reinforce the main idea of the circular quality of the house. And this is a picture of Bart and I taken fairly recently, maybe 5 years ago, and he's become one of my best friends, and it's been a joy to know him and a joy to work with him. So in 1988, I initiated the idea of an Aldendow National Conference, and we put together a program, about a 3-day program, where people would come from all over the country to celebrate the architecture of Aldendow. And I'm going to see if I can point here. Oops. Well, let me just say this: the man in the light blue suit in the middle is Fay Jones, who is one of the most famous Wright apprentices. And I had gone to, he lives in Arkansas, and I had gone to Fayetteville to meet him and encourage him to come here. The man here is John Lautner, who I would probably say was the greatest of the Taliesin apprentices, and he came because they all loved Aldendow's architecture. And this is Wes Peters, who was Frank Lloyd Wright's chief assistant, and he was alive at that point. So we had this wonderful collection of people who came to celebrate Alden's architecture. And I developed a friendship especially with Fay Jones and John Lautner. And this is the Fay Jones Thorn Crown Chapel, which I think was designed in about 1980, and was voted by the AIA as being the greatest building of the last quarter of the 20th century. And so as part of my I guess you could say my recruiting trip, Fay sent me to Thorn Crown, which was fairly new at that point. When I was still working for Neil, I was the low man on the totem pole, so I had to go to the mailbox to get mail every day. And the day that this came out on the cover of one of the, I can't remember if it was Progressive Architecture or Architectural Record or which magazine it was, but I saw it and I just went, oh my God, that is beautiful. But I went all the way back to his office. I didn't open the thing, and I stood behind him as he opened it, and we were just in awe of the place. This is what the inside of it looks like, and the one of the main ideas of this building was that it had all these trusses. There was a series of repeating trusses, and they had to all be assembled on site. And they wanted the site to be totally left natural, so no construction scar or whatever. And Fay told me that the key detail here was right here, where at the intersection of these two parts of the two beams meeting, and that was always the darkest place in a truss like that. And so he invented that detail to be open like that. And this is a lantern that he designed. These are on each of the walls of the building. But I sat in this building for about 2 hours just watching the people come and go, and it's in this natural forest, and it was an incredibly windy day, and the trees are going like this, and pretty soon it started to feel like the walls were going in and out, and I just sort of got in a trance. And all of a sudden, at the front of the building, this young woman got up at the podium and she started singing Amazing Grace, and without any amplification or anything. And it was just the most amazing moment I've ever had in architecture. And when she finished, I just sort of put my head down and gently walked out and just didn't want to break the spell. It's what architecture can do when you have a magnificent building like this. So somebody told Fay that somebody wrote about Thorn Crown that it reminded them of a Gothic cathedral, and he said, I wasn't really thinking about Gothic when I designed that building, and so I decided, well, if they want Gothic, I'll give them Gothic. And this is the Cooper Chapel in Bella Vista, which is only 20 or so miles from Thorn Crown, and it's equally beautiful. The day I was there just as it was being finished, and this couple from Minnesota was going to be married there, and they were going to be the first people married there. And I said, do you know how historic this is? You're about to be married in a building that is going to become world famous. And they hadn't a clue. They just I don't even know how they happened to design it, but I hope they appreciated it after my introduction, because I was so excited about it. I was probably kind of obnoxious. But one of the things I love about Fay Jones is that he was his first job was for this man that had a 5 and dime store in Bentonville, Arkansas, northwest Arkansas, and he wanted a house to be designed, and Fay told me later that the house he did do for these people was inspired by the Alden Dow home and studio and its relation to water. And they started the construction of the house, and he noted that the man had acquired another 5 and dime store, and they got a little bit further along, and he'd acquired another 5 and dime store. Fay started thinking, boy, this guy's really got it on the, is on the ball with his business. Well, it turned out to be Sam Walton, and he was starting the Walmart business. Well, Fay and his wife Gus became very close friends of all the Walton family, and the Walton house was one of his most special houses that he ever did. And Mrs. Walton, I think, asked him to come back, and they wanted to slightly refine some little detail where a screen was needed to make for a little bit more privacy. And Fay told me that he worked on it. The house was so special for him, he wasn't going to just whip something off, and he thought about it. And he said, Henry, by the time I finished it, I probably had 12 or 14 hours into the design, which was eventually constructed. And he said, I charge out at about $300 an hour for my work. And he said, that got to be a lot of money. And he said, I just didn't have the heart to charge him. That's what kind of a man Fay Jones was. So this is in my early days in Los Angeles with John Lautner. I had met him at my Alden Dow's daughter Lloyd had helped set up for me to meet Lautner. I had once asked Alden who he thought the greatest architect in the world was, and he unequivocally answered John Lautner. So that was when I was still in college, and I started studying Lautner, which was hard to find any of his work back then. But we had a Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy conference in LA in 1986, where I actually presented Teeter's Knoll for the first time. And I worked it out so that I could meet John Lautner, and we had dinner together, and Lloyd Mills, Alden's daughter, had set it up. And so we went out to dinner at Musso and Frank's on Hollywood Boulevard, which is kind of a famous restaurant, and it was Lautner's favorite place to go. And John is just the opposite kind of person of Fay Jones. He's very opinionated, and the Musso's is, at that point there were a lot of men in blue suits and kind of conservative looking, and John started getting worked up about the goddamn building inspectors in LA and the bankers, and they wouldn't let him do anything. And he's this big, tall man, at least 6'6", and he's got a very large head. And pretty soon some of those bankers are turning around and looking at the table and wondering what is going on. And this happened many times with me over the years with Lautner. We went to that restaurant quite a few times. And anyway, afterwards, we finished dinner quite late because we enjoyed each other's company. And one of the houses that was going to be on the tour was Frank Lloyd Wright's Freeman House, which is one of the concrete block houses above Hollywood in LA, and it was in really bad condition. And John had actually done a little bit of work in the, I think, on the seating area around the fireplace. And it was, it was about 10 at night, and he insisted that we drive up to see it. And all of the all the people who were doing the restoration were there, showing the people from the conference what was happening. And when John Lautner walked in the place, it was like Mick Jagger had just walked onto the concert stage. Everybody turned around and looked, and they were so thrilled to have him there. And so I started going down to LA. I was living part-time in San Francisco at that time, and I started going down to LA to visit John. And I take the shuttle from SFO to Burbank and rent a car and pick him up, and then we go out to his jobs in Malibu. And I followed this particular job is a poured concrete house for a one bedroom and an 8-car garage. And it's one of the most complex buildings because the walls curve in section, and it was just a tour de force. It was kind of his crowning achievement at the end of his life. But I think Lautner's greatest work is the Arango house in Acapulco, and I had always really wanted to see it. This is probably like a museum model of this, because Lautner did his own models, but they were much more rustic than this. But this is a house that is up almost on the top of the cliff, overlooking the Acapulco Bay. I think it was built in the late 1960s or so, and I think it's the best work that he ever did. But Lautner hated handrails, and so on this house he designed a continuous moat that went all the way where these guys are standing. It's not quite finished yet. Our standing was the quote-unquote living room, and Lautner was also the inventor of the infinity edge, where the water just rolls over the edge so that the building actually merges with the background. His house, Silvertop in Silver Lake in LA, was the first example of this. But this was the ultimate example where there's basically a moat. You could actually swim around this whole living room. The bedrooms are all downstairs, and this is what it looks like. And so I asked John, I said, do you think that it would be possible ever to see the Arango house? And he said, well, maybe I could try calling Mr. Arango in Mexico City and see if he would let us come. And so he did, and got the approval. And so I called up my parents, who were always open for any architecture adventure, and they agreed to come with us. And so they flew down from Sun Valley to San Francisco and picked my wife Lynette and I up, and then we flew down to Burbank and picked up the Lautners and flew to Acapulco. And we spent basically the whole afternoon. Mr. Arango came over from Mexico City and had lunch with us, and then he left. And we were staying at the Las Brisas Hotel, which is right below this, which was sort of a very classic, probably 1950s building. I have a feeling it was probably a famous hotel, but I didn't really know about it that much. And we stayed there, and we were, after having been there, we were having dinner, and there was an event going on next door, in the other part of the dining room, and there were floodlights on, and it turned out that Bob Hope was there filming a Christmas special. And Lautner had designed the Hope House in the 60s, late or about 1970, and it was a job that didn't go well, and there was a construction fire, and there were multiple lawsuits, and everybody ended up angry at everybody else. And so we're sitting there having dinner. We had to ask the waiter what was going on next door, and they said, well, that's Bob Hope filming this special. And things quieted down next door as our appetizer was arriving. And John got up and went in, and he disappeared from our dinner for 15 or so minutes. And he came back just beaming, big smile on his face, and he had reconciled with the Hopes. And I don't know how my life can be so lucky that these things have happened. It made Lautner's, it just made it, because he was always so upset about that and complained about it when I was with him. So this is John at the Colonia House, the Bart Prince house in Sun Valley, and my parents liked Lautner so much because he was so outspoken and he was so passionate about architecture that they decided to commission him to design a house for them. And so this is in the early process of that. And here we are at their house. This is the front door of their Neil Wright house, and my dad is on the left, and John in the middle, and me on the right. And that's John's wife, Francesca, on the bottom. And they are working on it's directly across the street from the Neil Wright house. They had bought all of the lots at the end of this cul-de-sac, and they chose one of them to build the Lautner house. And here John is with his chief assistant, Helena Arouet, who is still practicing architect. She's from Argentina, and she was the head of his office. And I said, how do you happen to find somebody from Argentina to work for you? And she worked for him for like 35 years. And he says, well, hell yes, I did. How will you expect me to find somebody that good in the United States? But I think they're figuring out a level here or something. So here is my mother with Helena. You can't really see Helena's at the bottom, but this is the construction model for what would have been the Whiting House by Lautner, and it's a little bit hard to see what's going on. As with all of Lautner's models, they're very rough like this, and that was what it was going to have, a 70-foot long window that faced the mountains to the northwest of Sun Valley, and it would be essentially earth sheltered. This is a berm that was built up, that would have been built up, and it was going to be really cool. But unfortunately, John died before it could have been finished, or it could be finished or even started, and so that was the house that was on his drawing board when he died. And so, to conclude, this is a photograph of my partner Bunsey and I at, of course, the Alden Dow home and studio. And now, appropriately enough, we're on the other side of the pond. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them. I always enjoy questions at the end of a talk, and anything you have to ask would be wonderful.
When did you decide to give up landscape architecture and become a building architect? And how did that work?
Well, I won't make the claim to being a building architect because I'm not a licensed architect, but I probably, when Professor Kienitz turned around with tears in his eyes, having done that FLLW on the chalkboard. That's probably when I decided. I was no longer committed to studying landscape architecture, and I was a terrible teammate if on any landscape architecture program. I did do landscape architecture for Neil Wright, but that moment was probably when I decided to stick to architecture, and I haven't regretted it.
Have you been back to Madison to see the Civic Center?
I have been. I have been, and I was friends with Tony Putnam, the man who did that for Frank Lloyd Wright. Are you going to ask me what I think of it?
Yeah. I grew up in Madison, so it's quite controversial. I listened to my parents talk about it when I was passed in the 50s.
Oh, that was a project. I'm sure you know this, but for everybody else, that was a project that Wright started, I think, in the 50s or something, and the people in Madison were very upset by it, but they continued to push it or whatever. It was a very, very audacious project, basically, which unites the capital of Madison, which is on an isthmus between Lake Monona and Lake Mendota. And it's actually an incredible building. You walk out on the roof of it and look over Lake Monona, and then you come down. A lot of people don't care for the way that Tony Putnam detailed the building. Some things were changed because it was a project that was in the news in Madison for decades, but it was finally built, and it's a convention center, and it's a pretty cool building, but some people can carp on the detailing, especially the Wrightian people. They're kind of finicky.
It looks spectacular when you look across the lake.
Pardon me?
When you look across the lake at it, it's really spectacular.
Does it look? Yeah. We had a building conservancy conference in that building, and it was a really cool building. I definitely liked being there, but it's really the boldness of the basic concept of Frank Lloyd Wright, the idea of uniting the Capitol Square. Madison is one of the most beautiful cities of that size in the country, and the state capitol sits high up in the center of the isthmus between these two lakes, and there's a square around it, and then the roads radiate out from there. So it's a and this definitely enhances the beauty of the city of Madison.
Was the purchasing of Teater's Knoll difficult, or was that fairly straightforward?
It turned out to be very straightforward. Pardon? Yes. I was desperately worried that some architect from Los Angeles would find out about it, because I literally found out that it was for sale. I'd been going to see it every 6 months or so for 3 years, and have watched it deteriorate over the years. And all of a sudden one day it came on the market for sale, and I had a friend who was going from Sun Valley down to Hagerman, and I said, why don't you check on the Teater Studio and see what's happening with it? And he called me back the next day and said that it was that it had just come on the market. And so I actually, the first time I saw it, I had no intention of buying it. I only wanted to see the inside because I had never trespassed and never gone on the site, but had only seen that view. And I wondered how it related to the river and what the inside looked like. And when I saw what bad condition it was, coincidentally, I was headed back to Florida to have a meeting with my uncle. And that's when it was the very next day after I'd seen it that I asked him about it. And it turned out to be surprisingly easy to buy. They accepted, I gave them a lowball offer, and the Quaker Church, to my great surprise, immediately accepted the first offer. And it was so fun because my sister Martha was visiting from California, and she rode with me with the realtor down 90 miles from Sun Valley. And we sat in the car when he went in the realtor's office, and we had also requested to see the blueprints. And Bill came out of the office, and he said, here are the plans to your new house. And I'll never forget it. So it turned out to be quite easy. So I don't think that anybody else in Idaho would have ever considered buying that. And it was just one of those fated things that was just meant to be. It was the absolute perfect job for me to do, and I was the absolute perfect person to do it, because it's in a beautiful condition, totally respecting Frank Lloyd Wright's intention. Some people might carp at certain things that I did, but in general, the building that was probably going to be left to ruin, was saved.
We have time for one more.
Clearly, thank you for sharing how architecture has influenced your sort of grand trajectory. I'm curious, in a more granular sense, how does living in a Frank Lloyd Wright house inform and influence your day-to-day life?
Oh. The question is, what is it like to live in a Frank Lloyd Wright house? And you asked the right person, because I've spent 40 years observing. My interest in architecture is really more about what it feels like to live in architecture. And Frank Lloyd Wright had a saying that, based somewhat on the Tao Te Ching, what is the reality of the building? The walls and ceiling and roof, or the space enclosed? And that comes from the Tao Te Ching, which says, basically, what is the reality of the bowl itself, or the space enclosed? And that has been something that's informed me for all of my life. In the early days, I actually did a thought experiment or whatever of the idea of, what if you filled that whole building with water and froze it, and then chipped away all the walls, and you'd have this giant ice cube, and what would be the character of that ice cube? And so I have thought about that so many times, and especially now in my life, I observe what happens, the way the light affects, the way the light changes. It's always changing, and more recently, we cleared out some trees below the house, and at the winter solstice, that eddy that was down below the bunkhouse, the sun reflects off that, and it shines on and illuminates the ceiling. And I'm embarrassed to admit that I'd lived there so long and I'd never really noticed that, and it's just the most magical the way the light works, and it sparkles, and you can actually see the movement of the river as it is there. It's a really hard place to leave. Yeah, I just love being there. I would guess that I have spent more hours contemplating Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture or at least of one building, than probably anybody has. I started out at age 26 as one of the youngest Frank Lloyd Wright homeowners, and now I'm probably one of the senior Frank Lloyd Wright homeowners. We have one gentleman who's going to be 100 next month, and he's lived in his house since 1950. And Roland is just this wonderful man, and I had a phone call with him a week ago or so, and I wish I was as bright and present as he is, but he went to Frank Lloyd Wright as a young man of 26, and at age 100, he's still in his house. It's a record that will never be broken. And he's a wonderful man, and we all love him. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was very special.